into a school in Christchurch that did enforce a uniform standard. If the button wasn't on the centre of your cap, if your socks weren't pulled up, if your fingernails weren't a regulation
Oh, yes,
length,
we had
you were
regulation
beaten.
underwear at Wellington
Yes,
Girls.
mad.
Did you really?
Oh, yeah.
Mad,
yeah.
barking stuff.
It's hideous.
I'm perfectly with this person saying, why are we so hung up on these things? Get rid of them, really. I don't see the point.
I mean, the only benefit that I can see is there is an upfront cost. But then you only really have to have a couple of shirts and a couple of...
2 shirts and a pair of grey pants.
Yeah, exactly. And
you
so
can
ultimately
live in that
it might
forever, I
end
guess.
up being cheaper. The thing is, of course, it depends on... I remember my younger son went to a private school for 3 years, and I bought him a blazer at the start of those 3 years, and by the end of it I knew he wasn't going to continue, and it was honestly coming up sort of mid-forearm, but I was refusing to buy him another blazer because they're so expensive. And I said, I'm sorry,
blazer.
your humiliation is my saving. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you can sell them, of course, afterwards. I know people who did sell second-hand school uniforms as well.
Yeah.
Schools do shape themselves into little fiefdoms,
Absolutely.
don't they?
Yeah, well, yeah. The one that I did certainly did.
And they require status.
Yeah.
And sometimes it was about identifying, I got called up in front of the principal once because apparently some girl in Wellington Girls uniform was smoking on Crofton Downs station. And so she pulled me up in front because, I went in Crofton Downs and went, oh, no, that's not the girl. And then hustled me out again.
Not the girl.
Not the girl,
Not the girl.
Yes, absolutely. And I went, oh, okay, great. But, so at least they had narrowed it down to the school. But still, I mean, really,
I mean, really.
Yeah, really.
Sleep with a wet, cold flannel on your face, thank you. We've been mentioning that...
And have terrible dreams about drowning, really.
That's right.
Waterboarding.
Yes.
Struggling away out of that.
Put your winter wheat bags into the freezer and put your feet on them on a hot night.
Oh, that's quite nice. I like the thought of that.
Thorndon Pool is heated to 28 degrees. Thank you for that information.
It wasn't when I was a kid, I don't think.
Okay. It's been recently heated to 28 degrees.
Here we go.
We've been mentioning the disgusting habits of our freedom campers as they use our nicest places as toilets. And now Queenstown's mayor is saying that they're going to do something about the Lake Hayes car park. Actually, what is the latest on that? Just a moment. Yes, Jim Bolt says Lake Hayes lower shot over. A council crackdown underway in Queenstown with those 2 popular freedom camping sites set to close.
When they say popular, I drove past there at 10 o'clock in the morning and looked down at the foreshore of Lake Hayes, and I'm not exaggerating, there would have been 90 camper vans on the beach on Lake Hayes.
Wow, at 10 in the morning.
Yeah, and I went, wow. And the one thing that occurred to me as I drove along, I went, I wonder what they do with all that stuff that accumulates.
Yeah.
And there were hundreds, what looked like hundreds of these, and I went, and then I realised there must have been a car park for those particular people. But it was like, wow, there are extraordinary numbers of them on the road.
And no place for them. We mentioned yesterday the Cromwell Top 10 closing down. In Europe, says an emailer, they have freedom camping areas for campers with toilets only. They've got a toilet emptying place, water supply, places for a specific number of campers. And there are many of these sites all over Europe. You can buy maps showing where all the sites are. In England, on the other hand, their reaction to the huge number of camper vans is to forbid their staying almost everywhere.
As they did with the gypsies in the old days, move them on.
Yeah, which is kind of the direction we might be heading in. We just need more places, don't we?
Well, don't we need places where we can empty the toilets?
Well, yeah, exactly. Either more infrastructure or this is something that we can't have because the cost to our environment and the enjoyment of the place for other people is too much.
Yeah.
I think there is a toilet emptying map, though, isn't there?
There's a toilet emptying what? A map?
Right.
But there are places where you can remove effluent from trucks as well.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I'm assuming that you can do the same thing with...
Last word today, especially on we talked a lot about road safety this week, especially on motorbikes, and we discussed this with Peter earlier in the week, and I don't want to go into it all again.
Fair enough.
But one question, though, from more than one listener. Why is it that motorcycle riders must pay a large ACC amount to register their machines, while a rugby player or other sports person pays nothing? Motorcycle riding is arguably a sport, is it not? Megan Rangiora.
In many ways, it is and can be. And one of the questions that I asked ACC was why are motorcyclists paying for the quad bike accidents?
Okay. And the answer
whole
was?
Different thing.
Shut up, go away, basically.
The official answer.
Yes.
On your bike.
On your bike, mate.
Nice, Catherine, nice. Catherine Robertson, thank you.
Thank you.
For being on the panel today. And Peter Elliott, thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, everybody. We are back tomorrow with the panel and John Campbell with Checkpoint soon.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten, tēnei. The largest private sector union says it will continue to fight against the use of 90-day trials, which the government has announced will remain in place for small businesses. The government today unveiled changes to employment law, including removing the ability of businesses with 20 or more workers to use such trials. Under the legislation, 90-day trials will remain as they are for smaller businesses, but larger businesses will still be able to use a probationary period. The National Secretary of E2, Bill Newson, says the union will be arguing at Select Committee for the trials to be scrapped completely.
The evidence shows, and the last government's own evidence showed, that the 90-day trial periods were not having the effect on increasing employment that they were designed to have.
Bill Newson from E2. The Employers and Manufacturers Association says the government's changes to employment law will remove the flexibility businesses need to compete internationally. Critics of a move to chlorinate Christchurch's water supply say the public should have been consulted first. Earlier this week, the City Council revealed the latest assessments by engineers in December raised concerns that some below-ground wellheads could become contaminated, especially during heavy flooding. Today, the Council voted 12-3 to install temporary chlorination in all of the city's 56 pump stations at an initial cost of $600,000. The damaged wellheads will also be repaired. Councillor Sarah Templeton voted against the move, saying the public needed to be consulted first.
One of the key things for me was that there is no urgency in this. We've had a delay of a month already, and the Medical Officer of Health has said that that's not a problem at this stage, and we haven't been able to engage with the community and get the community's views. I don't believe that meets our obligations under the Local Government Act.
Councillor Sarah Templeton. Tests have shown chemicals used in firefighting foam have contaminated drinking water at 7 properties near Air Force bases. 64 properties were tested after the Defence Force discovered the chemicals PFOA and PFOS had leached into soil and water near the bases. Today, the Health Minister, David Clark, said 5 properties near Ohakia in the Lower North Island and 2 near Woodburn bases in Marlborough had unacceptable levels. 3 of those had been using the contaminated water as their primary drinking source. Residents near the bases have been supplied with bottled water while they awaited the results of the tests done in December. The chemicals don't pose an immediate health risk, but long-term consumption has been linked to increased cancer risk, high cholesterol, a lowered immune system and health issues with babies. Freedom campers who stay beside Lake Wanaka can expect to have their vehicles clamped following tough new measures on illegal camping in the area. The Queenstown Lakes District Council today announced a crackdown on freedom camping following complaints by residents that some campers leave human waste behind in some popular camping spots. 2 reserves at Lake Hayes and the Shotover Delta will be closed to freedom campers within weeks. Speaking to the media today, the Mayor Jim Bolt says he's also aware of problems with freedom campers parking and staying overnight beside Lake Wanaka, where freedom camping is prohibited.
We will be moving to police that very strongly in coming months. People camping there can expect to be clamped, can expect to be fined. We find that unacceptable.
Jim Bolt says the council will be working on a freedom camping strategy. After a week-long emotionally charged sentencing hearing, the disgraced former US Olympic gymnastics doctor Larry Nassar has been jailed for 175 years. More than 150 women accused him of molesting them under the guise of medical treatment, including some of the country's top gymnasts and Olympic medalists. But for Kylie Stevens, the abuse began when she was just 6 years old. Her parents and Nassar and his wife were friends, and the family shared holidays together. He began abusing her in his basement when the rest of the family were elsewhere in the house. After today's hearing, she paid tribute to all those who had joined her in speaking out.
I think we have started a tidal wave of people speaking up because they feel supported, they feel validated, and that's not just for Nassar victims, that's for every victim of sexual assault and sexual abuse.
Kylie Stevens says she told her parents about Nassar's abuse, but they didn't believe her. The British pop star Sir Elton John has announced he's quitting touring after nearly 50 years, but will perform one last long world tour starting in September. The 70-year-old singer says his priorities have changed after becoming a parent to 2 children with his husband David Furnish. He denied reports that he was quitting touring because of ill health. Sir Elton says his final tour will last about 3 years and take him all around the world in the most extensive tour he'll ever do. He'll play in Australia and New Zealand from December 2019 until February 2020. It's 5:05. Sport and opening batsman Colin Munro says the red-hot New Zealand cricket team still aren't the finished product. The Black Caps have won all 13 matches they've played this summer. But ahead of tonight's second 2020 against Pakistan, Munro says they're still striving for improvements.
We're always trying to bring massive intensity with the ball and in the field. It's still somewhere where we've spoken about it the last few games that we can get better and better at. We want to be known as one of the best fielding teams in the world consistently, and making sure that every single facet of the game, if we're raising the bar and getting better and better, whether we win games or lose games, as long as we feel that we are getting better as a team.
Colin Munro. Meanwhile, New Zealand have been dumped out of the Under-19 World Cup after a 202-run thumping from Afghanistan in their quarter-final in Christchurch. The Silver Ferns must cope better under pressure in Game 2 of the Netball Quad Series against South Africa tomorrow morning. Both teams are winless in the competition so far, and coach Janine Southby says mental toughness is key.
The challenge is staying mentally aware and ability to adjust and when people put pressure on us. So, certainly parts of our play when we turned fully, when we let the ball go, when we'd done our prep work on attack, and when everyone got onto defence, it made such a difference.
Janine Southby. And 15 North Korean ice hockey players have crossed into South Korea for their first practice as part of a joint women's team for next month's Winter Olympics. The 2 Koreas will also march together under a unified flag at the opening ceremony. That's the news.
Tears?
The American flag, and it's got #1 fan, and underneath it says, "We love Neil Diamond."
Tradition?
Women shouldn't speak in the domain of Tūmatauinga, the god of war.
Trade deals?
Hallelujah is how I would put it. This is a big moment.
News you can trust. Morning Report with Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, the Ministry for Primary Industries responds to criticism of it over kauri dieback. And after 10, the Canadian transgender athlete Kristen Worley, who took the International Olympic Committee to court over its stance on gender testing and won. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel fine. Isolated showers during the afternoons and evenings. Waikato, Waitomo and Taumarunui fine spells. However, afternoon showers tomorrow, some possibly thundery. Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taihape fine spells. However, showers and possible thunderstorms during the afternoons and evenings. Taranaki to Kapiti mainly fine. Isolated afternoon showers about Taranaki tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Wellington, mainly fine today, afternoon and evening showers about the ranges of Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, some possibly thundery. Cloudy periods tomorrow with patchy coastal drizzle. Nelson and Marlborough to Otago, afternoon and evening showers inland today and tomorrow, some possibly thundery, otherwise fine apart from patchy cloud and drizzle about the east coast. Bulla to Fiordland, rain in Fiordland and isolated showers elsewhere, clearing by tonight. Southland, isolated showers today, mainly fine tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy today, a few showers tomorrow. It's 9 minutes past 5.
Tauti mai rai, hoa mā he kōrero, kei te haere, he kaupapa kei te karawhiua. Welcome to Checkpoint everyone for Thursday the 25th of January. Tonight, a resident whose property backs onto the Ohakia Air Force Base tells us he's no idea whether or not his water is contaminated. 7 properties beside 2 bases are. Christchurch votes to chlorinate its water for the time being. Other than the C and the P, what is the difference between the CPTPP and the TPP plus, of course, the weather? All of that coming up. Thank you for being with us. We begin tonight with the government's changes to employment law, and there have been many and varied reactions to them this afternoon. Unions are pledging to continue the fight against the 90-day trials, which will remain in place for small businesses under law changes announced by the government today. The proposed law rolls back a lot of the changes to collective bargaining and unions and union access that the previous National-led government had put in place, a move which National claims will hit the job market. The Minister, Ian Lees-Galloway, will join us later in the program, but first here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Labor campaigned on replacing the 90-day trial period with a system it said would be fairer. But after being lobbied that the trials are helpful, particularly for smaller businesses, the policy has been changed. Jacinda Ardern says it was New Zealand First that pushed to keep the 90-day trial in place for those small businesses.
I want to make clear, though, that in all of our discussions, they were very clear that they wanted to weed out those employers who weren't acting responsibly in the way that they were engaging with employees, but this was certainly something they advocated for.
Jacinda Ardern says it's simply the reality of being in a coalition government that compromises have to be made. The Green Party co-leader James Shaw says his party remains opposed to 90-day trials, but it will support the legislation.
This is not a bad law, it's good. This is a good reform. It doesn't go quite as far as we'd like it to, but it's going to affect, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people positively. And we'll just keep looking for other opportunities to keep pushing the boat out.
The National Party leader Bill English says the watering down of the policy shows how weak the government is.
It can be influenced. It's concerned about the drop in business confidence, and I would say to New Zealand First, who are close to a number of big job-rich industries, and to small businesses out there and employer organisations, put pressure on this government.
The National Secretary of E2 Union, Bill Newson, says it's disappointing the 90-day trial remains in place at all, and the union will be arguing at Select Committee for it to be scrapped completely.
We believe that they are unduly unfair to working people. We believe in trial periods. We understand they're important, but we think that they should be fair to workers and employers. And also the evidence shows, and the last government's own evidence showed, that the 90-day trial periods were not having the effect on increasing employment that they were designed to have.
Jacinda Ardern says the government will do further research into 90-day trial periods to find out what the real effect is on businesses and their staff.
There's been a lot of anecdotal evidence that's presented, but nothing really that delves any deeper. And look, what we're really clear on from the outset is, unlike the last government, we don't see this as a device to increase job creation.
The legislation also rolls back most of National's changes to collective bargaining and union rights. These include restoring the duty to conclude bargaining, unless there's a good reason not to, removal of the right for employers to refuse to bargain for a multi-employer collective agreement, and the restoration of the right of unions to be able to go onto a work site without prior employer consent. The Chief Executive of the Employers and Manufacturers Association, Campbell, says taken as a whole, those changes will remove a lot of flexibility for employers, which in turn is bad for productivity and workplace harmony.
Embedded in this is code for a lot of union control, where, bearing in mind, only 15% of the workplace is in a union. But I caution everybody, this has got a long way to go. The Minister has made it quite plain and clear that there will be consultation and a robust Select Committee process. So we expect that as this moves through, we'll maybe make things a little bit more workable.
Campbell says he's heartened by how open and willing to consult the new government is, and how the three parties in power are working together, calling it refreshing. The legislation will be introduced to Parliament on Monday and debated in early February. Atui te wharipari mata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Chris Bramwell.
5:14, just before we go on, there's been a crash on or near the Harbour Bridge approaching the city from the North Shore. A huge tail, traffic backed up. It is being cleared. Things will start running again, but if you can avoid it coming from the North Shore towards the city, best to do so for the time being. 7 properties, 5 beside the Ohakia Air Force Base near Bulls in the Manawatu region, and 2 neighbouring the Woodburn Air Force Base in Blenheim, have been found to have contaminated drinking water. 64 properties were tested after the Defence Force discovered chemicals previously used in firefighting foam had leached into soil and water on and near the bases. Potentially carcinogenic, they were used in firefighting foams for almost 50 years and have been found at sites close to airports and military bases in Australia and now New Zealand. The chemicals are bioaccumulative, meaning they don't break down in the environment. The government says the first stage of testing is complete, and the Defence Force is talking to people who have drinking water contamination above guidelines. But Checkpoint has spoken to half a dozen farmers this afternoon who've been tested. Most are frustrated by a lack of information. Aaron Taylor's farms received the runoff from the Ohakia Air Force Base, and he hasn't a clue what's going on.
I got in touch with them. One of our properties was supposed to have been tested, but the bore's been decommissioned and filled in. But I rang them about one of our other properties that gets flooded out by all the water from there, and they just pretty much told me to ring bloody MPI or the Ministry of Health.
So you have more than one property that is a neighbour to or very near the airbase?
Yeah. So our main farms, like we've got one farm that's probably about a K from the airbase up there, and then our main farms down the road a bit further are probably about maybe 3 or 4K, and the other ones, like, so all the water that drains off the airbase comes down across our down behind our farms, and when we get flooded out from there very regularly. We've got sort of 300 acres that goes underwater with all the surface water off Ohakia, and that was my concern. We've got a shallow bore in that floodplain, and they didn't want to know about it.
So when Ohakia floods, the water ends up on your farm?
Yeah, it does. Yep. And it doesn't take a great deal of water to flood it out now, with there being so much bloody concrete and roof area up there. It's when I was a little kid, it used to take 4 or 5 inches, but now when it's waterlogged, it only takes an inch, and we're underwater. So we're getting flooded off there very regularly.
And do you think you've been tested? Do you know whether or not you've been tested?
No, we haven't been tested. Because I contacted them. Like our bores on our main farms are very deep, so I seriously doubt that they would be affected. But it was the shallow bore that I want to test. That's by my house. And the water out of that shallow bore feeds a cow shed, and which washes the inside of a plant, and it waters the garden and stuff around my house, which my kids play in under the sprinkler and stuff. So. That was my concern, though. They just pretty much fobbed us off and said, "No, you're outside of the testing zone. We don't want to know."
So what's your sense, and what's the broader sense there? Has this been a rigorous and good faith process to find out what has been going on with the compounds, the PFAS from this foam?
To the best of my knowledge, they haven't told us anything. We don't even know what it is. That was my. When I rang them to find out what it actually is and what it causes, that's when they told me to get in touch with MPI and the Ministry of Health. They wouldn't elaborate as to what it is, what it does, and what it causes, which is very frustrating. And after googling it, the what's been going on over in Australia, you read about it and it's a carcinogenic, so it doesn't read well. Why aren't they telling us more?
So that is from a neighbour about a K away from the Ohakia Air Force Base. The Defence Force has declined an interview. They've asked instead for written questions. They must think we're a newspaper in 1872. We are waiting for a response. 18 minutes past 5. The Christchurch City Council will flush the city's famously pure water with chlorine. Earlier this week, staff revealed that some of the city's 156 wells were not sufficiently sealed and could become contaminated, especially during heavy flooding. They're recommending that all of the water supplies be temporarily chlorinated for a year while the wellheads are fixed. Today, after hours of discussion and debate, the council eventually agreed. Logan Church was there.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Christchurch residents are proud of their clean water, but today the City Council reluctantly voted 12-3 to chlorinate it for the next 12 months. This came after a discovery by staff in December last year that all 103 below-ground wellheads spread all over the city needed to be upgraded. The Mayor, Leanne Dalzell, says chlorinating the water, while the wells are upgraded, is not something anyone wanted to do.
Nobody wants to see Christchurch's pristine water with chlorine in it. But when we're faced with a situation where we can no longer rely on the secure status of our groundwater because of the standard of the boreheads and the fact that the engineers won't sign off on them, What else can we do as a council?
Leanne Dalzell says if there was a water crisis like the gastro outbreak in Havelock North in 2016, which landed dozens in hospital, hundreds of thousands of Christchurch residents could be infected. It will cost Christchurch ratepayers $840,000 to fix the boreheads. To add the chlorine, it will take an initial investment of $600,000, with ongoing costs of $20,000 per month. But there was some stiff opposition to the idea, including Councillor Mike Davidson.
Yes, I'm slightly disappointed. You know, we pride ourselves on our water, and you know, there is times when we do have to chlorinate the water. Obviously, after the earthquake is a prime example of that. But following that, you know, the wellheads haven't changed over that period of time when we haven't been chlorinating, and there's been absolutely no issue, no transgressions.
The issue of water quality was thrust into the spotlight last year, when a second report into the Havelock North gastro outbreak warns about 800,000 people, including all of Christchurch's residents on town supply, were at risk. But Councillor Sarah Templeton said the public should have been consulted before a decision was made today.
One of the key things for me was that there is no urgency in this. You know, we've had a delay of a month already, and the Medical Officer of Health has said that that's not a problem at this stage, and we haven't been able to engage with the community and get the community's views. And I don't believe that that meets our obligations under the Local Government Act.
Many councillors noted during the meeting that if they decided against temporary chlorination, they could be forced to do so in the future. This can be done by the Medical Officer of Health, Alistair Humphrey, who says it would have been his next step if the council voted no.
Had they not decided to temporarily chlorinate the water, I would have been pretty much obliged to issue a compliance order.
Leanne Dalzell says the water bore upgrades will ensure the chlorination can stop as soon as possible.
We want to remove it as soon as we possibly can.
Chlorination will commence in 60 days once the infrastructure is installed. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, call Logan Church Chennai.
Feedback already coming in from Christchurch. It is very welcome. Text us 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Let's head now to the Queenstown Lakes District, where the council has... I'm going to go, in fact, to the United States. I skipped on there. Disgraced long-time US gymnastics team Dr. Larry Nassar has been sentenced to up to 175 years in prison for the sexual assault of female gymnasts, some as young as 6 and 7. Over the past 7 days, a Michigan courtroom has heard from 156 victims, including Olympic gold medalists, in what's been described as the greatest sexual assault scandal in US history. Now, as Bridget Burke reports, there are calls for representatives from Michigan State University, USA Gymnastics, and the US Olympic Committee to resign. NASA's victims say the three organisations knew about his offending, but were too slow to act.
Dozens of Larry Nassar's 156 victims gathered in court today demanding answers after the former doctor was sentenced to up to 175 years in prison for sexual assault and molestation.
But this is bigger than him. This is way bigger than him. This is about the institutions that protected him. And to reiterate all of the statements that have been said before me, everyone in the world should be outraged right now. And if you aren't, you should examine why. Because if you aren't as outraged as I am, you should ask yourselves why.
54-year-old Nassar is already serving a 60-year sentence for child pornography convictions. The gymnasts say the institutions he worked for ignored their concerns and allowed his systematic abuse to continue for decades.
Who else at MSU had received reports of Larry's behavior and did not act? Who else helped contribute to the greatest sexual assault scandal in history?
Nassar was led into court today shackled and wearing a blue boiler suit. One of his victims, Kaylee Lorenz, who had earlier given a victim impact statement, said she felt sick being in the same room.
I feel nauseous, even standing in front of you. Like the feeling as if I'm being assaulted by you all over again.
Another victim, Rachel Den Hollander, was the first of Nassar's victims to speak out publicly about his offending in 2016.
And this is why I pity you. Because when a person loses the ability to define good and evil, When they cannot define evil, they can no longer define and enjoy what is truly good. When a person can harm another human being, especially a child, without true guilt, they have lost the ability to truly love.
In court today, Nassar read a statement turning to addresses victims who had gathered for his sentencing.
Your words these past several days, your words, have had a significant emotional effect on myself and has shaken me to my core. I also recognize that what I am feeling pales in comparison to the pain, trauma, and emotional destruction that all of you have experienced. There are no words that can describe the depth and breadth of how sorry I am for what has occurred. An acceptable apology.
Sir, you need to stay at the microphone or they can't hear you.
An acceptable apology to all of you is impossible to write and convey. I will carry your words with me for the rest of my days.
But after a week of listening to dozens of victim impact statements, Judge Rosemary Aquilina was taking no prisoners as she read parts of a letter Nassar wrote before sentencing. The letter contradicted his apology, claiming he was a good doctor who was manipulated and his accusers had fabricated the claims to gain money and fame.
Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. It is just a complete nightmare. The stories that are being fabricated to sensationalize this.
Judge Aquilina then threw his statement on the bench in disgust.
And you survived the 60 years in federal court first, and then you started my 40 years? You've gone off the page here as to what I'm doing.
She told an expressionless Nassar she was sentencing him to 2,100 months in prison, 175 years.
I just signed your death warrant. I need everyone to be quiet. I still have contempt powers. I told you I'm not nice.
As Nassar was led from the court, Judge Aquilina thanked victim Rachel Den Hollander for her courage in speaking out and prompting others to come forward.
Your sister survivors, and I thank you. You are the bravest person I have ever had in my courtroom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
After sentencing, Nassar's victims, including Kyle Stevens, said they were grateful for the leadership shown by the police and the court.
He's going away for a really long time. He's not practicing medicine anymore. He's not fooling anyone anymore. I think all these little girls grew up to strong women that really rocked his world.
3 members of the US Gymnastics Board have resigned this week over the scandal, and there are calls for the president of Michigan State University, where Nassar worked for nearly 20 years, to also resign. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
Now to the Queenstown Lakes District, where the council has today cracked down on freedom campers after some visitors, in the words of Mayor Jim Bolt, treated the district like a toilet. Locals have told Checkpoint they are quite literally, and I quote, sick of the shit that comes from freedom campers. Jim Bolt has announced a raft of measures to tackle the issues freedom campers have created, including banning them from reserves such as Lake Hayes and the Shotover Delta.
Like all things, a minority have caused issues in the district, and these really relate to the use of reserve areas which are popular with our locals, and locals are feeling shut out of that, and also the issue of despoiling the district by using the area as a giant toilet, and this can't go on.
Jim Bolt says the council will also be taking a hard line in Wanaka, where, despite a ban on camping, the lakefront is still being used by freedom campers.
We also are aware of issues in Wanaka and the lakefront area there. Freedom camping is, of course, prohibited there, but the law is being flouted, and we will be moving to police that very strongly in coming months. People camping there can expect to be clamped, can expect to be fined.
The council will be encouraging campers to utilise Department of Conservation campsites in the district, as well as exploring the possibility of opening up and expanding an area at the Shotover Bridge. Now, the majority of locals told Checkpoint, our reporter Timothy Brown, that they are pleased with the moves.
I think that clamping's a good idea because it'll quickly get spread around. That's what happens, and it will stop people doing it. But I do think, yes, they do have to do something, and it needs it.
Yeah, they should be directed to the council should actually take control of the situation, total control. And the way I see it, instead of spending money on policing the whole thing, if they spent that money on putting in, say, a shower block unit or a toilet block unit, and just have decent facilities, you know. I think that's the... Otherwise it's just going to carry on. This is only going to get worse.
But some people who live and work in the area, particularly those originally from outside the district, have sympathy for those wanting to explore Queenstown and its beautiful surrounds on a budget.
Well, I think the dock sites are really, really beautiful, and that's where I've done most of my camping. I think for a freedom camper, they are much more what you're kind of looking for because they are set in really amazing places. But I think wheel clamping might be a bit extreme. Maybe a warning or something would be a bit better. But yeah, it's difficult to say really. I think everyone should just chill out about it.
Jim Bolt says the district's ratepayers can no longer foot the bill for the burden of visitors to the area on their own. He says he will be speaking to government about securing funding to assist in tackling the issue. And he also wants to investigate the possibility of a visitor levy for the district. The clampdown will come into effect soon. It's also been very hot in that area, and we will look at the weather later in the program. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ, and thank you for being with us. Coming up, David Parker on the new TPP deal. Add a C and a P, what difference does it make? We're in Wanaka as residents prepare for that heat wave. An 11-year-old on his pogo stick takes on the country's steepest street for charity. Later, the Minister talks to us about employment law changes and big delays on Auckland's northern motorway after a crash on the Harbour Bridge. Don't forget, you can text us to 101. We can be tweeted at Checkpoint RNZ, and you can email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Nona next with business news, but before it all, with the time at 28 minutes to 6, Katrina with the headlines.
The E2 union says it will keep fighting 90-day employment trials, which the government has retained for small businesses. The National Secretary, Bill Newson, says the union will be arguing for the trials to be scrapped completely. The Employers and Manufacturers Association says the government's changes to employment law will remove the flexibility businesses need to compete internationally. A police officer's been injured after a fleeing driver rammed a patrol car in the far north this afternoon. Police abandoned the chase on the Karikari Peninsula and set up road spikes to stop the driver, who reversed directly into the police car behind him. The man will appear in the Kaitaia court tomorrow on multiple charges. An Ohakea farmer has told Checkpoint he's not been able to get his property tested for contamination from chemicals used in firefighting foam. Tests have shown chemicals used in the foam have contaminated drinking water at 7 properties near Air Force bases. Today, the Health Minister, David Clark, said 5 properties near Ohakea in the Lower North Island and 2 near Woodburn Base in Marlborough had unacceptable levels of the chemicals. Christchurch Council has voted to chlorinate the city's water following an engineer's report that warned some underground wellheads could be subject to contamination. All of the city's water supplies will be temporarily chlorinated for a year while the wellheads are fixed. Freedom campers who stay beside Lake Wanaka may have their vehicles clamped following tough new measures on illegal camping in the area. Queenstown Lakes District Council has also banned freedom camping at a Lake Hayes Reserve and at the Shotover Delta. The Transport Agency is asking Auckland motorists to delay travel or avoid travelling south over the Harbour Bridge as traffic remains heavy from an earlier crash. The crash was cleared about 3:30, however delays remain with traffic backed up as far north as Northcote Road. A spokesperson says motorists should delay travel if at all possible or look at alternative routes via the Upper Harbour motorway. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Which is about 26 minutes away. Thanks, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier. Hi, Nona. The New Zealand dollar fell a cent in early trading today following the release of the fourth quarter inflation data, which was much lower than expected. What are the numbers and why did the dollar fall?
Well, first of all, it shocked analysts and economists. They were expecting, you know, something that was little change from the third quarter, but no, it was a lot different. I mean, the numbers, the consumer price index rose 0.1% in the 3 months, and that was from 0.5 the quarter before. That's quite a difference. And in terms of the annual rise, it was 1.6% versus the expectation of 1.9.
Yeah.
So what does this really mean? It means that the dollar dropped a whole 1 cent like that, boom.
Because interest rates aren't going up any time in the future.
No, well, I think in the future, I wouldn't say any time in the future.
No, sorry, you're right. In the immediate future.
In the future, yes, I'd say maybe, yes.
Yeah.
In fact, the economists are still picking a rate rise in February 2019, so not for at least a year or so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fascinating, thank you. The Tauranga Energy Company Trust, the Energy Consumer Trust.
Yeah, it's confusing.
Yeah, it is.
Boy, this story drove me crazy all day.
And all of the utilities are complex, aren't they? And they are going to quit paying Trustpower's electricity companies their annual dividend from 2023. Why and what's been the reaction?
Okay, so basically there's a trust that has a 26% stake in Trustpower, and their consumers that are in the trust, that's 58,000 of Trustpower's customers, power electricity customers, get a dividend every year, from the consumer trust. And they're saying, look, we're going to cancel that. We don't want to pay that out after 5 years from now. So to give you an incentive, we'll give you $2,500 as a check, as a one-time check. And then we'll also give you the dividend payout for the next 5 years and then nothing. You'll get no more payout. Well, Trustpower is like, we don't like this. Well, that's their customers, right? And a lot of their loyalty is based on this idea that their electricity company customers also are basically shareholders.
Yeah.
And so they get a benefit from being customers. But if that went away, well, you know, where's the loyalty, huh? I mean, if you don't own a part of the company anymore, there you go. So anyways, that's a big deal. And it made their share price fall 5%. Just boom, just like that. So at the end of the day, though, not so bad. It ended down just over 3%, but it was pretty significant. And, you know, that's not the end of the story. I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about what's going on with that.
We sure will. This is a fascinating one, too. A Gisborne-based company is raising money to become the first company to produce medical cannabis in New Zealand. What's it planning?
Okay, so this is a company called Hikurangi Cannabis, and they are based in Gisborne, and they set up this business a couple of years ago with hemp. And, well, it was going really well. I guess it's an easy crop to grow there. And they were employing quite a few people. Well, they've just done a deal with a US-based company called Rezo Sciences, who are going to take whatever they can produce, and they're going to manufacture a medical cannabis in the United States. But what this company in Gisborne wants to do is raise money to produce it themselves here in New Zealand, which will be a cheaper product for consumers here, and also export overseas. And so I spoke with the managing director. His name is Manu Caddy, and he says they're going to try and raise some funds from the local community, but basically we'll hear a little bit about what he plans to do.
We'll be producing for the domestic market for patients in New Zealand to provide a much more affordable product than what they can get access to at the moment from imported medicines, and we'll also be growing for export. We have some significant orders already for CBD and eventually higher THC.
What's your estimate of how much you can produce?
We've got plenty of land and plenty of willing workers. The orders that we have at the moment are in the thousands of kilograms, both for extract and for the raw flower. You know, would expect to be growing tens of thousands of plants. We've got about 5,000 growing this season.
Tens of thousands. No, Hikurangi Cannabis Managing Director Manu Caddy talking to you earlier. How did the markets end up today?
Okay, so the index, the top 50 index rose more than 0.5%, 46 points to 8,370. The dollar is trading still very high despite that big drop, 73.8 US cents. That was off that 74.3, so big rise overnight. 91.1 cents Australian and 52.5 pence.
Business reporter here in Auckland, Nona Peltier. Thank you very much indeed. Let's go to the weather now with our Met Service man meteorologist John Law. Kia ora, John.
Kia ora again. It could be a rather cloudy start today for Auckland. Perhaps a few spots of drizzle to watch out for as well. But they'll clear off and we should be left with some brighter skies and some sunshine. Just the occasional shower to watch out for through the afternoon. Temperature-wise, still very warm across the North Island, both by day and overnight. And those warm temperatures help to lead to more showers through the central parts of the North Island across towards Waikato, and likes of Rotorua and Taupo. Now it's a cloudy day in Wellington, especially first thing. A few spots of drizzle up in towards the ranges. It will brighten up across Wellington, up towards the Kapiti coast. But down that eastern coast, I think we will find more clouds through the daytime, meaning temperatures in, say, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay a little bit cooler than we've been seeing over the last few days. Another area of cloud moves up and across Canterbury to start things off, and we will find again a few spots of drizzle, but it'll brighten up as we head in towards the afternoon, and temperature-wise, highs back to around about 22 degrees Celsius for Christchurch. Many places on the South Island will stay dry. Some showers springing up through the inland parts of Nelson and Marlborough. And I think that early cloud clearing off, but many places looking pretty warm once again. And that's it from me.
Thanks, John. We'll look at today's weather a bit later in the program. What was the TPP has become the CPTPP. But what's changed? The addition of the words comprehensive and progressive, obviously. We don't miss a trick. The US has withdrawn under President Donald Trump, but the criticisms that led many thousands of people to stretch the length of Queen Street in February 2016 protesting against the TPP, have they been addressed? Winston Peters, who opposed the TPP, now supports it. Many of you would have heard him telling Guardian and Morning Report this morning that the revised agreement contains substantial changes. So this morning I asked Trade Minister David Parker, who's in London, to explain to the people who protested in the streets against the TPP what is different.
I think the people who were in the streets protesting a couple of years ago were there for a number of reasons. There's a lot of people feel insecure as a consequence of the changes brought about by globalisation, a lot of which we can't control. A lot of people realise there's so many jobs changing as a consequence of automation and robots and other technological change. Then there are other people who think, look, I don't feel that it's right that multinationals don't pay tax anywhere in the world or very low rates of tax. And then there are still other people who say, I don't like being outbid to buy a house in my own country by someone from overseas. And I think that the most beautiful bays in the Bay of Islands ought to be purchased by New Zealanders rather than by a very wealthy person from overseas. And there are still other people who say there are clauses in trade agreements that they think that go too far to protect the rights of overseas investors, including these so-called ISDS clauses. So there's a lot of reasons behind it, and some of them are valid.
I covered that huge march through central Auckland, and I spoke to dozens of people, and I guess in very broad terms, the issue that people were concerned about was sovereignty being lost through unfettered access to New Zealand, through the loss of the sort of Farm Act model because of the powers of Big Pharma, because of the ISDS provisions. How has CPTPP responded to those concerns about TPP?
Well, for me, the most important sovereignty issue is being able to control who buys homes in your own houses. And we were told at the time when the TPP was going through that we had to choose as a country between being able to be in free trade agreements and being able to control who owns our houses. And of course, in the Labour Party and the coalition with New Zealand First, with the support of the Greens, we've proven that we can actually have both because we're legislating for that very outcome at the moment. But in respect of ISDS clauses, that is another curb on sovereignty. And so the idea that a foreign corporation could sue the New Zealand government when dissatisfied with a government contract or a government regulation in an international tribunal rather than through the New Zealand courts is something that offends people. And so I think that's a valid complaint, particularly when you're dealing with first world countries who respect property rights and have non-corrupt court systems themselves. And that's why as a government the Labour governments reversed the earlier position and said we're now opposed to ISDS clauses. The next question is what have we achieved in TPP in respect of ISDS clauses? And the outcome there isn't perfect, but it's better than it was. We have narrowed their ambit. The last version of the agreement, for example, if you had disputes between the government and an overseas contractor building the Waterview Tunnel, they could have sued the government if they were in dispute through an international tribunal. Now they can't. they've got a contractual dispute to sue the government through the New Zealand courts. We've narrowed the number of countries to whom these ISDS provisions apply to through side letters with Australia and various other countries who bilaterally agree with us that they will never use the ISDS provisions in the TPP agreement. But it is true that in a minor way they apply.
You say side letters with Australia and other countries, plural. Australia, of course, is very much a matter of public record, that side letter. So what other countries have you got this bilateral agreement with?
Australia's the most important one because that's the largest source of foreign direct investment into New Zealand. I can't disclose the other ones yet because we actually haven't got them finalised, but we expect them to be finalised in the next couple of months. But there are more than one. The other point I would make is that there is concern amongst some people that, if you introduce sort of plain packaging for cigarettes that you will be sued. You can't be sued for that. Some people are concerned that if you have environmental regulation or change to tax rates or health and safety laws, you can be successfully sued. I'm absolutely confident that those things are well protected under the clauses which protect the right of the New Zealand government to regulate, as is the ability to run a public health system, a public education system, to properly fund SOEs. So, the residual risk arising out of the part of the ISDS clauses that we cannot get rid of, which we wanted to get rid of, is, we think, balanced by the advantages of being able to sell more goods and services to overseas countries, which supports New Zealanders' jobs and incomes.
David Parker talking to me from London this morning. Someone just texted in left-wing protesters were against it because it was perceived to be a national party treaty. Now there's a Labor government. All we hear are the crickets, please. 40 minutes to 6. If you're seeking some respite from the heat, it's likely you'll have to wait a few days longer. January is on track to be the hottest month in 20 years. The current record for the hottest ever month on record was set in February 98, and NIWA says this month is likely to surpass that, especially given the forecast to the end of the month. Met Services Kelvedon in North Canterbury was the hottest town in the country today, reaching 33. Masterton hit 31. NIWA climate data shows the average max temperature in Masterton in January is 24. RNZ reporter Katie Scotcher spoke to these Romanian tourists in the Wairarapa town's Queen Elizabeth Park.
We just arrived here, but yes, indeed, it's hotter than everywhere we've been around New Zealand. We've been traveling for about 10 days almost now, Northland and coming down towards Wellington. And yeah, it's been the hottest we've seen in New Zealand so far.
Yep, it's hot there today. Masterton Mayor Lynn Patterson says she's been going from office to office looking for the coolest spot, and the heat has meant children have been avoiding the town.
I think you can see through town, a lot of the children aren't in town. I think they're either at the swimming pool or at home. And I have noticed that in the last few days that we're not seeing the children. It's still school holidays, but we're not seeing the children everywhere that we would normally see. And I just think it's too hot.
Ms Patterson says the forecast doesn't bode well for the farming community.
We will be worried if it continues for the next couple of weeks without any rain, but what has been unusual, really hot days and then thunderstorms at night, so that's been helpful to keep our rivers flowing and keep our water supply in stock. So I think, yes, in 2 to 3 weeks' time, if we haven't had some rain, we will be worried.
That's Masterton Mayor Lynn Patterson talking to our reporter Katie Scotcher. It is coming up to 12 minutes to 6. The Otago town of Wanaka, let's head there, is predicted to experience a heat wave, but far from fretting about the heat, locals and visitors alike are embracing it, throwing themselves into the town's lake. How lovely, and enjoying the natural beauty of its surrounds. We sent our wonderful Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown to investigate how the town is placed ahead of the arrival of all this heat.
Extreme heat, even in summer, is a foreign concept for those of us in New Zealand's coastal cities. But for the hardy folk of inland Otago, high temperatures are an annual occurrence and not worth batting an eyelid over. As I approached Wanaka, the heartland of this coming heat wave, I expected a scene from The Walking Dead. Locals so bleary-eyed from lack of sleep they'd resemble zombies, and so dehydrated they'd gnash their teeth through cracked lips at anything that might satisfy their thirst. Instead, I found smiles.
I think everybody's actually quite enjoying it. It sort of drives one outdoors to run for shade, run for the water, and then everybody's sharing that same experience.
The weather's been fantastic. We've really enjoyed it. It's been a great hot summer and been great for our business.
Night's tough, but again, we got up this morning at 6 o'clock and went down the lake and had a swim and freshen up and start the day right. But yeah, it's good because you can access the water pretty easily.
So, that's some locals. Loving it. What does the Queenstown Lakes District Deputy Mayor say? A long-time Wanaka resident, Callum McLeod, says this summer is one out of the box. But that's a cause for celebration, not concern.
Last summer was a bit of a classic. People would normally come here in the holiday period and say, oh, is this normal? I say, come back in February. And this is sort of February weather. I don't think I can remember a summer that's been this long and this warm and this sustained. And anecdotally speaking to locals, that's exactly their feedback.
Callum McLeod says there's no point complaining about the weather. Instead, he welcomes the coming heatwave and the opportunity it provides to enjoy the recreation the town offers.
Coming from Scotland, complaining about the weather is sort of standard stuff, but it's usually because it's rubbish, you know, and yeah, it's been a bit warm at night, but really, you know, at the end of the day, that's a positive. It's a bit like looking at Wanaka and complaining about growth. You know, yes, it's growing, but it's a heck of a lot better than shrinking.
And the hot weather also put a smile on the face of Tessa Reid, a staff member at Patagonia Chocolates in Wanaka, where ice cream sales have been through the roof.
Every day at about like 2 till 5, it's really busy, like the line will be out the door to the road kind of thing every day, like 30 degrees, you know.
But not everyone has been able to enjoy the heat. Wanaka Volunteer Fire Brigade Chief Garth Campbell says firefighters have been busy dealing with the aftermath of the early start to a dry and hot summer.
We've obviously had a few late night call-outs. The risk is really high at the moment, even though it's cooling down today. The fire risk is still there, and it will be for a wee while. I'm not even sure when we're supposed to get rain. They're talking another 10 days before we're even looking like it.
Garth Campbell says that has made life tough for the area's brigades.
We've had sleepless nights as far as staying up all night tending fires. The one on Mount Alpha, our guys were there basically till 7 o'clock in the morning till the helicopters started to fly again. We started at 3 in the afternoon, got home at 10:30, got called out again at 11:30 and stayed there till 7 in the morning. So that makes for a big night.
It's why he is calling for common sense during the coming week, as temperatures stay above 30 degrees and the fire risk escalates. In Wanaka, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
We're all over the country tonight. Let's head north from Wanaka. After closing its doors almost 20 years ago, moves are being made to reopen St Stephen's Maori boarding school. The old site where the school used to sit has been left to waste away at the foothills of the Bombay Hills. That's south of Auckland and a stone's throw from the southern motorway. New plans for the school will be revealed tomorrow at this year's Old Boys School reunion in the Bay of Plenty. Te Manu Korehi reporter John Boynton has more.
St Joseph's boasts an impressive alumni list of Maori leaders, politicians and sports stars, including Shane Jones, Te Ururua Flavel and former All Black Dallas Seymour. The school was closed in 2000 because of performance and financial issues and concerns over the safety of students. The chair of the Old Boys Association, Joe Harawira, has been heading a campaign to reopen the school.
We've been carrying this for quite a while, carrying the aspirations of the old boys. Don't get me wrong, there's old boys that don't want to borrow the school, but we look at what the school offered us. We look at the leadership that's come out of that school.
Joe Harawira says repeated promises by both the government and the church to build a new school have not come to fruition. He hopes a change of government will help change that, and also wants to work with the Anglican Church to build a new pathway for the school.
We have to develop our relationship with the church and with the St Stephen's Queen Vic Trust Board. We've got to be positive about it and just keep moving forward.
He says there is a risk of losing a whole generation of Maori leaders because of a lack of schools such as St Stephen's.
I think there is still a place for Maori boarding schools. If you look at the camaraderie and the things that I learned and people of the ilk of Te Ururua and the other Maori leaders across the motu.
Maori educationalist Te Kani Kingi is another former student who has been working behind the scenes to raise a school from the ashes. Moves to reopen the school again, he says, comes from a desire to lift the underperformance of Māori boys in education.
We think there's an opportunity to innovate in that space, to develop a new model and to ensure that our Māori boys have every opportunity to succeed at school and later in life.
Te Kani Kingi believes there is still a strong case for Māori boarding schools, despite the recent struggles of schools like Hato Petera in Auckland. He cites St Joseph's Māori Girls' College as a success story, with the Napier School producing some of Māoridim's most well-known leaders.
When we look at the data and the statistics, mainstream or conventional approaches to the education of Māori boys are failing, really. If we don't do something, there's a generation of boys that will miss out.
Former Māori Party leader Te Ururua Flavel attended the school in the early 70s.
Oh, it was a great experience. Pretty much set me up for life. Sure, didn't have everything that other schools had, but what we did have was a real close brotherhood and bond.
Te Ururua Flavel says the school helped to create a legacy of success for its students.
Sometimes their grandparents, their parents, their brothers and so on had attended the school, and therefore was an element of legacy. There was always the historical element of looking on the walls and seeing all those who'd been before us.
The plans for St Stephen's reopening will be revealed tomorrow at Kokohino Marae in Te Teko. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko John Boynton aho.
4.5 to 6. Every day it seems someone somewhere is doing something brave, tenacious, mad, quirky, whatever, to grab a headline and raise some money for charity. But we think this one rather takes the cake. An 11-year-old Dunedin boy this morning pogo jumped to the top of Baldwin Street, officially the steepest residential street in the world, to raise more than $7,000 for his sister's cancer charity. What a good brother. And he says he has plenty more planned. Our reporter Ian Telfer was there for the big ride.
All right, we're off.
It's not badged the world's steepest street for nothing. Many people had trouble walking to the top, so Harry Willis was certainly bold. His father Stephen thought maybe too bold.
I thought he was probably been a little bit over-ambitious in trying to do Baldwin Street, but we worked through it.
But he said Harry's idea also made him proud.
My daughter Darcy had quite aggressive cancer, so she got pulled out of Dunedin and put in a child cancer unit up in Christchurch back in 2016. So Harry decided that he wanted to pogo stick up Baldwin Street, but not just do it for a record. He wanted to do something good out of it and raise some money for Ronald McDonald House.
So Harry made his plans and practiced 25 minutes a day, pogo jumping up and down his street for weeks. He was feeling pretty confident. You could have chosen any street, you could have chosen your own street, but you chose the world's steepest street.
Yeah.
Why was that?
Because it's a good challenge and I do like challenges.
Wow. So what are your chances, do you think?
I think it's a 75% chance that I'll make it up.
He downed a can of Coke and a Mars bar for energy, and then at 10:30 this morning, he was off. There were plenty of well-wishers. At least 100 local kids and their families joined dozens of bemused tourists.
Go Harry! Go Harry! Go Harry!
And towards the end, as the slope hits a punishing 19-degree angle, he certainly needed them. But in just 9 minutes, he was there. His father, Stephen, was delighted.
Oh, mate, I'm totally ecstatic, very excited. So the nervousness of this morning is gone. But yeah, very excited, very proud of him. So, yeah, I mean, world record and getting a swag of donations for a great charity. Got to be happy.
His sister Darcy, who's now in remission from the cancer, said it was great, though their 8-year-old brother Jesse tried to claim a bit of credit.
Harry got the idea because I got the pogo stick for Christmas and then he had a go and he said he was really good at it, so he decided to get another pogo stick and pogo stick up Baldwin Street.
Did you always think he was going to do it? It looked quite tough.
No, I never knew he was going to do that.
Harry's school principal, Jenny Clark, says he was always a determined young man.
Very exciting for a community to come together like this, isn't it? To support such a worthy cause.
One out of the box though, pogo sticking up Baldwin Street.
I know, well he's pogo sticked around school for the last couple of months, so good practice.
As for Harry, he was feeling glad, though tired.
Hard. A lot harder than I thought.
When did it start getting really tough? Which was the hardest bit?
This bit right at the end because I started getting a stitch.
but he seems to have got the bug.
So what's your next move now?
I don't know, maybe cross country up North Road on my pogo stick.
Next challenge. All right.
So everything has to be via pogo stick now?
Yep.
But Harry Willis should know his charity stunt is going to be a hard one to beat. On the world's steepest street for Checkpoint, Ian Telfer.
Good boy, Harry. What a wonderful brother you are. About 45 seconds before the news at 6. Lots of feedback coming in tonight. Thank you. And really split on the issue of the CPTPP or the TPP or whatever the hell it's called this week. Stuart from Palmy in Otago, Palmerston, north of Dunedin there, says, since the same people are still concerned about the TPPA, it's obviously a non-partisan issue. It is the ISDS provisions that are the problem. Really interesting to hear David Parker say that they are doing bilateral agreements with countries other than Australia to override the ISDS. We're trying to find out exactly how many bilaterals are being done. We will get back to you on that one. Speaking of getting back to you, Ian Lees Galloway after 6 on the government's employment changes.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The Employers and Manufacturers Association says the government's changes to employment law will remove the flexibility businesses need to compete internationally. The legislation restores the duty to conclude collective bargaining unless there's a good reason not to, and removes the right for employers to refuse to bargain for a multi-employer collective agreement. It also restores the right of unions to be able to go onto a worksite without prior employer consent. The EMA's Chief Executive, Kim Campbell, says taken as a whole, those changes will remove a lot of flexibility for employers, which is bad for productivity and workplace harmony.
You know, embedded in this is code for a lot of union control, where, bearing in mind, only 15% of the workplace, is in a union. But I caution everybody, this has got a long way to go. The Minister has made it quite plain and clear that there will be consultation and a robust select committee process.
Kim Campbell. Critics of a move to chlorinate Christchurch's water supply say the public should have been consulted first. Earlier this week, the City Council revealed the latest assessments by engineers in December raised concerns that some below-ground wellheads could become contaminated, especially during heavy flooding. Logan Church reports.
Today, the council voted 12-3 to install temporary chlorination at all of the city's 56 pump stations, at an initial cost of $600,000. Damaged wellheads will also be repaired. Councillor Sarah Templeton voted against the move, saying the public needed to be consulted first. She says there is no immediate health risk and the council has a legal responsibility to consult residents on issues of high importance. Ko Logan Church tēnei.
A farmer near the Ohakea Air Force Base in Manawatu is frustrated by the lack of information about possible contamination of his water supply. 64 properties were tested after the Defence Force discovered chemicals used in firefighting foam had leached into soil and water near Ohakea and the Woodburn Base in Marlborough. 7 properties near the base have been found to have contaminated drinking water. But farmer Aaron Taylor told Checkpoint even though one of his farms is regularly flooded by water draining off the Ohakea base, he hasn't been able to get a shallow bore on the property tested.
The water out of that shallow bore feeds a cowshed and which washes the inside of a plant, and it waters the garden and stuff around my house, which my kids play in under the sprinkler and stuff. So that was my concern, though. They just pretty much fobbed us off and said, no, you're outside of the testing zone. We don't want to know.
Ohakea farmer Aaron Taylor says he was told to contact the Health Ministry or the Ministry for Primary Industries. Freedom campers who stay beside Lake Wanaka can expect to have their vehicles clamped following tough new measures on illegal camping. The Queenstown Lakes District Council today announced a crackdown on freedom camping following complaints by residents that some campers leave human waste behind in several popular camping spots. 2 reserves at Lake Hayes and the Shotover Delta will be closed to freedom campers within weeks. The Mayor, Jim Bolt, says he's also aware of problems with freedom campers parking and staying overnight along Lake Wanaka, where freedom camping is prohibited. He says council staff will be policing Lake Wanaka strongly in coming months and vehicles may be clamped. A fleeing driver has reversed into a police car, injuring an officer in Northland this afternoon. The police say the driver of a speeding car failed to stop on inland road on the Karikari Peninsula about 2:45. The police gave chase but soon gave up the pursuit due to the car being driven dangerously. Road spikes eventually stopped the car, but the driver reversed at high speed directly into a police car behind. One officer received minor injuries and was treated at the scene. A 45-year-old Manganui man will appear in the Kaitaia District Court on several charges tomorrow. A charity that provides school children with food and clothes is worried many families will not be able to afford the cost of sending their children back to school next week. The founder and chief executive of KidsCan, Julie Chapman, says some children won't return to school on time this year because their families cannot afford books, uniforms or food.
There are some children in New Zealand right now who will not start school when it goes back because their families will keep them home because they're embarrassed that they're unable to provide those things that the school requires of them, and therefore they will keep them home until they manage to actually get there.
Julie Chapman says KidsCan is helping children at 700 schools this year, but 19 more are on its waiting list, seeking help for 2,600 students. A judge in California has issued a protective order banning the parents of 13 siblings held captive in a suburban home from contacting them. David and Louise Turpin, who appeared in court in shackles, must stay 100 yards away from their children and have no electronic contact for 3 years. The Turpins have been charged with multiple counts of torture, false imprisonment and other charges and have pleaded not guilty. It's 6:05. To sport, opening batsman Colin Munro says there's no secret recipe to the New Zealand cricket team's superb run of success. The Black Caps are 13 from 13 at home this summer, leading some to suggest they may be the country's best ever limited overs side. Munro says it's nice to hear that, but admits the squad don't see how they're going about their work as anything special.
It's a massive confidence boost for us, but we just 11, 12, 13 bunch of blokes just enjoying each other's company and actually just enjoying playing for New Zealand and doing the right thing. And we've got a core group of players and a great squad that do everything for what the team needs at that special moment in the game.
Colin Munro. Tonight's second T20 against Pakistan in Auckland starts at 7 o'clock. Meanwhile, New Zealand have been dumped out of the Under-19 World Cup after a 202-run thumping from Afghanistan in their quarter-final in Christchurch. Chasing 310 for victory, the home side were rolled for just 107 in the 29th over. And it's do or die for the Silver Ferns tomorrow morning when they face South Africa for Game 2 of the Netball Quad Series. With both teams desperately needing to win, coach Janine Southby believes they need to rattle some cages if they're to have any chance of retaining their series title.
One thing that with South Africa is they have a very low error rate. So the challenge for us is to create ball and create pressure for them to make errors so that we can obviously get our turnovers and score off ours. So that's the awareness thing we're around their game.
Janine Southby. Tomorrow morning's game gets underway at 6:30. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Our Changing World Goes to the Dogs with a special investigation into canine intelligence, both IQ and EQ. The BBC tells the story of nitrous oxide. I bet that's a laugh a minute. And this week's cultural ambassador, our modern dancer Christian celebrates the work of New Zealand choreographer Malia Johnston. In fact, he brings her in with him. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel. Fine isolated showers during the afternoons and evenings. Waikato, Waitomo and Taumaranui, fine spells. However, afternoon showers tomorrow, some possibly thundery. Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taihape, fine spells. However, showers and possible thunderstorms during the afternoons and evenings. Taranaki to Kapiti, mainly fine isolated afternoon showers about Taranaki tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Wellington, mainly fine today, afternoon and evening showers about the ranges of Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, some possibly thundery, cloudy periods tomorrow and patchy coastal drizzle. Nelson and Marlborough through to Otago, afternoon and evening showers inland today and tomorrow, some possibly thundery, otherwise fine apart from patchy cloud and drizzle about the east coast. Bulla to Fiordland, rain in Fiordland and isolated showers elsewhere, clearing by tonight. Southland, isolated showers today, mainly fine tomorrow, and for the Chatham Islands, cloudy today, a few showers tomorrow. It's coming up to 9 minutes past 6.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. The government's unveiled changes to employment law, including restrictions around the use of the 90-day trial period brought in under the previous National-led government. Now, we covered the details at the top of the program tonight if you've just tuned in. Also a feature of the announcement today, a rollback of a lot of the changes to collective bargaining and union access that the previous government put in place. Labor wanted the 90-day trial period for new workers gone. It's not. Businesses with fewer than 20 employees can still use it. Larger businesses will still be able to have a probationary period, but with greater protections for employees. Workplace Relations Minister Ian Lees-Galloway told me this is a political compromise.
Well, look, that's exactly what it is. This is coalition government. It's MMP in action. Everybody knows that we went to the election as the Labor Party with a different proposal. When we sat down with our coalition partner, New Zealand First, and with the Green Party as well, we discovered that we had 3 different positions on 90 days. Yeah, just as people do in collective bargaining, we stayed at the table until we had a result that worked for all of us. So, look, this is really good news for working people. It means now that 70% of employees in New Zealand are no longer subject to a 90-day trial, but it also means that those small businesses who have told us that it does make them feel a little bit more secure about employing people still have access to it. And this is a result of negotiations between different parties in government.
OK, so New Zealand First was driving that stuff around small businesses, were they?
Yeah, it was New Zealand First who really wanted us to come up with a solution that left 90-day trials intact for some businesses, particularly small businesses. But yeah, as I said, this is coalition government. We had 3 parties with 3 positions. We were able to get around the table and thrash out a position that is now the government policy.
Yeah, and I look at the responses and they are divided on tribal lines, I guess exactly as you would expect. So the unions are saying this is good. The First Union, for example, says it's a good first step in restoring balance and fairness to the employment relations system. You have the EMA saying, look, we didn't think the system was that broke. You have the Nats, of course, who designed the system that you were rewriting, saying actually 247,000 jobs were created under us, and we have the 3rd highest employment rate in the OECD.
Look, there's absolutely no evidence to suggest that the changes that the National Party made did anything to support job growth. And particularly 90-day trials, the one piece of research that was commissioned by the government said, look, we can't find any evidence that 90-day trial periods have supported job growth or made vulnerable workers more likely to get a job. What we do know is that for the last 30 years, working people in New Zealand have received less and less of a share of the benefits of economic growth. Wages have been stagnant in real terms, and conditions have been eroded consistently, especially over the last 9 years. So we do see an imbalance. I know the EMA said that that they don't see an imbalance. We do. I think a lot of working people do as well, and our mission as a government is to restore that balance.
When you say you saw it, was it because your ideology, and you are a Labor cabinet minister, so there is no criticism implicit in that, predisposed you to seeing it, or was there because there was evidence, in fact, that the legislation you have altered created an imbalance?
Yeah, look, I look at things like the labour income share over the last 30 years, which has plummeted for working people. It means that people receiving wages, who get their income through wages, have received a declining share of economic growth consistently for the last 30 years. So that's the kind of evidence, that is a fact, and that is the kind of evidence that we use in formulating our policy.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a statement of fact. I don't think anyone would dispute that. But that is not directly the result of the 90-day period, is it?
Oh, not of the 90-day period, but look, what we've got with the 90-day trials is that a whole host of workers were subject to a period of time where they had absolutely no rights at work, and that is something that we have a problem with as a Labor Party, and a lot of people who represent workers have a problem with. And we have seen examples of rogue employers misusing that. I totally understand that the vast majority of employers...
Yeah, and that's Kim Campbell's point, but have you seen many examples?
Look, we have seen some examples that have gone through the Employment Relations Authority. And I have to say the authority have been really great at adhering to the absolute letter of the law to ensure they can do what they can to uphold working people's rights when they're under a 90-day trial period. But yes, we have seen abuses of it. And this is the thing, with legislation, especially employment legislation, the vast majority of employers are good employers, they're going to do the right thing, and they don't need legislation to make them do the right thing. What we are trying to do is make sure that rogue employers aren't able to abuse the opportunities that are given to them through legislation.
Right, one final question. In terms of the imbalances that you were talking about, and there has been a great deal of concentration on this over the past week or two, and the people who are working poor, who are really struggling in our larger cities in particular, but are part of the workforce, how will this materially address their position?
Yeah, look, I mean, the changes that we've announced today will go some way to strengthening collective bargaining, and we do know from around the world that people who are on a collective agreement are certainly more likely to receive reasonable, decent pay rises year on year, and to make sure that their wages at least keep up with inflation, if not better. And we know that economies where there is a lot of collective bargaining in general, all workers do well as a result of that. But look, I'm absolutely upfront about the fact that what we've announced today is about reversing the changes that were made by the previous government. The real changes and the real positive things for, as you say, people who are on very low incomes who are still experiencing poverty despite being in work, that will come in the next round of changes that we're proposing. Those will be available for Parliament to scrutinise hopefully within the next 12 months, and that's a piece of work that I'm really excited about getting on with.
Ian Lees-Galloway talking to me from our gallery office earlier this afternoon. The Transport Accident Watchdog warns more accidents will happen if passenger boats are not forced to have fire alarms. The call comes after the Transport Accident Investigation Commission released its report into the fire and sinking of the PJ5 off the coast of Whakatane 2 years ago. It found a string of problems meant the crew was unable to stop the spread of the fire. Sally Murphy filed this report for us.
The PJ5 was coming back from a trip to White Island and approaching the Whakatane harbour in January 2016 when a fire broke out in the engine room. It spread so rapidly that the crew couldn't deploy the life raft, and some of the 60 people on board had to jump into the water without life jackets. The Commission cannot establish the cause of the fire on the boat, which remains at the bottom of the sea. But Chief Investigator Tim Burfoot says maritime rules did not require it to have a fire alarm, even though it could carry up to 90 passengers and operate up to 12 nautical miles from the coast.
Fires are a high risk on any vessel, so the key is to early detection so that the crew can start taking action to fight the fire and get passengers off the vessel if necessary. There was no fire detection system in the engine room and no fire alarm system connected to that.
Mr Burfoot says the crew used a CO2 extinguisher, but it had little effect.
The concept is with CO2 is used supposed to be able to fully close down the compartment so that the carbon dioxide stays in there and oxygen can't get in there. But in this case, oxygen was able to enter and reignite the fire.
The Commission made 2 recommendations to Maritime New Zealand. The first is to make sure those who design, install and use fire extinguishers understand how they work, which Maritime accepted. But the second, that Maritime New Zealand changed the rules so that boats bigger than 15 metres, carrying more than 36 passengers, have to have fire alarms installed, has not been enforced. It was actually recommended 15 years ago, but Maritime Director Keith Manch says a cost-to-benefit study done then did not meet the threshold to change the rules. Mr Manch says it's being reassessed as part of a wider review of 40 maritime rules.
Should that all be positive in the sense that the benefits outweigh the costs and it's a reasonable thing to do, then new or altered rules might require existing restricted limit passenger vessels to have fire detection and automatic fire alarm systems in engine rooms, as well as remotely operated extinguishing systems.
The tour company which owned the boat, White Island Tours, has since changed hands. In a statement, the new owners, Ngāti Awa Group Holdings, says the report confirms the company met all Maritime New Zealand requirements. It says if Maritime New Zealand changes the rules about fire alarms, it will install them. For Checkpoint, Sally Murphy.
Let's go to Ratana, where this week Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern stole the headlines after she was given a special place to speak on the paepae and received the gift of a name, Waru, for her new baby. But behind the scenes, she engaged with quite a different group of local rangatahi. Our reporter, Te Aniwa Hurihanganui, was the only reporter present, and this is her exclusive report.
Boil up or hangi?
Boil up.
Boil up, rugby or rugby league?
Oh, I'm the patron of the Mount Albert Lions, so rugby league.
Boil up and rugby league are two favourite choices of Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. The revelations weren't delivered to the hundreds out at the front of the marae, but to some delighted Ratana teenagers who hosted their own Q&A session with Ms Ardern. And the Prime Minister didn't disappoint.
Since the party colour's closer to the colour maroon, maroons or blues?
Oh, you can't do that. Oh, gold, the Lions all the way.
But then Ms Ardern's diplomatic skills were put to the test.
Bill English or John Key?
What am I doing with them?
You got to choose which one you would. You got to choose which one you would prefer.
Is this like this
English?
Mary, you know that?
Yeah. Yep, Bill English or John Key. Which one would you prefer?
Neither of them would work for me.
The questions were coming thick and fast from two of Ratana's youngest and brightest teenagers, Te Wata Mason and Himiora Renata. Te Wata was especially impressed and inspired by the visit.
Oh my God, I was so nervous because I didn't actually know that I was going to sit right next to her until 5 minutes she walked in, and I was just like, oh my God. She literally gave her spare time to come in here and talk to us, and yeah, that was mean. I'd never actually seen a Prime Minister come in and talk to our rangatahi and let rangatahi interview them.
Ratana has always been a Labour Party stronghold, but for the new generation, including Himiora Renata, a new government means someone new to relate to.
I think we've got a new face for our rangatahi, for our iwi Maori and also our country. And I think, yeah, our people needs that sort of oomph, that sort of push to, so we levitate in the world.
So, boil up, rugby league, diplomacy, the Prime Minister seemed well ahead on points, but Te Wata and Himiora had saved the best challenge till last.
Our challenge is called the Trumpet Challenge.
Okay.
How you place your mouth on it is you like tighten your lips, and you don't puff your cheeks, and you just...
Okay.
Kapai?
Kapai.
So while Ratana's youngest were impressed by our young Prime Minister, they don't think she should give up her day job just yet. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko te aniwa hurihanganui aho.
Delightful story, Te Anawa. Schools are starting to reopen from next week, and charities are warning many families can't afford back-to-school costs like computers, uniforms, school books, you name it. The Salvation Army is expecting a spike in applications for loans for laptop computers, and the charity Kids Can has 2,500 children on its waiting list for assistance. School principals say families should talk to them if they're having trouble with school bills. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen filed this report.
These Wellington parents have children starting back at school over the next week or two.
Just had to buy a MacBook for the one just starting college, so that's $1,700 straight off the bat.
Well, it will cost me around $1,000.
The school donation is $250 per child, and then there's an activity fee that we pay, which is about $80 a child, I think.
I don't know, maybe $2,000 or $3,000.
A couple of $100 I paid in fees. Well, not fees, like donations and stuff.
The parents with children at primary schools say the costs are manageable, while those facing hefty bills from secondary schools are not happy, but they're paying anyway. The founder and chief executive of the charity organisation Kids Can, Julie Chapman, says some families simply cannot afford those expenses. She says some children won't return to school on time this year because their parents don't have the money for uniforms, stationery or lunches.
There are some children in New Zealand right now who will not start school when it goes back because their families will keep them home because they're embarrassed that they're unable to provide those things that the school requires of them, and therefore they will keep them home until they manage to actually get there.
Julie Chapman says Kids Can is helping children at 700 schools this year, but 19 more are on its waiting list seeking help for 2,600 students.
Schools are recognising that increase in hardship seeing the impact that it's having on children and their ability to learn, and looking for ways to get those things like shoes, clothing, food, etc. into the hands of children directly so they have a better opportunity to learn at school.
Many schools now require children to have a digital device, often a cheap form of laptop computer or a Chromebook. Jodie Hoare from the Salvation Army's Community Finance Program says it's expecting a surge in inquiries from people wanting loans so they can buy the computers.
Around the sort of $300 to $400 mark. Some people need a bit more or want a bit of a more quality computer, so we sometimes look it up to about $800 if that's affordable. It's a big burden for people, particularly if they have more than one child that they're trying to get them for in the 1 year.
Mike Williams from the Secondary Principals Association says more families are certainly finding it harder to make ends meet.
My advice to parents is talk to your school. Most schools that I know of have a hardship fund where they can help. They have some strategies. Quite a few have a friendly charity here or there that can help on things. Working income can help for people on benefits. There are lots of strategies.
Mike Williams says schools don't want children to miss out on their education and they can help. For Checkpoint, John Gerritsen.
Let's end on to sport tonight. After 13 matches elsewhere around the country tonight, the New Zealand cricket team, the Black Caps, of course, play in Auckland for the first time this summer. Tonight's game is the second of 3 2020s against Pakistan. That is the shortened version of the one-day game. And the Black Caps have the chance to wrap up the series after a dominant 7-wicket win in Game 1 in Wellington on Monday. RNZ Auckland sports reporter Clay Wilson is at Eden Park and beams are now via live view as people streaming behind you. Clay, what's the night like? What sort of crowd are we expecting? What sort of gig is this going to be?
Yeah, it's a beautiful night down here actually, John. A perfect night for cricket. Quite mild, but blue sky, a bit overcast. But 22,000 they had for this similar fixture last year against South Africa, so I think we can expect roughly about the same, and I think given the way the Black Caps team is playing, perhaps they'll be disappointed if they didn't get that and more.
Yeah, they've been playing brilliantly. You don't want to tempt fate really, but they've had such a good season. Are you expecting it to continue, Clay?
All the signs are pointing to yes. They've been so dominant. I guess Pakistan have also been a little bit disappointing. They came here in really good form and haven't really lived up to that. But you can't take credit away from the Black Caps. They've certainly been really good, and I think the form on this ground and form in general playing at home, they just seem to be too good for this Pakistani side at the moment.
Yeah, and if we look through the season, the Test team, the one-day team, the 2020 team, a lot of players. There's a good rotation policy going on. Horses for courses, some very good selections. Who are we expecting to see tonight? What's their 11?
Well, of course, Captain Kane Williamson didn't play in Wellington. He had a little side strain that they rested him for, but he looks like he's back tonight. I saw him out there inspecting the pitch with Coach Mike Hesson earlier, so he'll be back. Ross Taylor and Tim Southey, as part of this rotation, sit out. Trent Bolt comes back in, and so does Lockie Ferguson. Another one to look out for tonight is young Ben Wheeler. He hasn't played for about a year for the Black Caps, a left-arm bowler and a more than handy middle to lower order batsman, so I think we can expect to probably see him get a run tonight as well.
Yeah, which will be good. I'd like to see him get a run. Some talk going around, and we always live in the moment with sporting teams, don't we? But people are saying this is the best limited overs team New Zealand's ever had. What do you make of that, Clay? Is that a reasonable claim to be making?
I could perhaps see where some people are coming from, given how well they're going. 13 wins on the trot, of course, it's a record for the Black Caps. But we've also got to remember that, the sides they've played against the West Indies, of course, and Pakistan haven't really lived up to expectations, have been a little bit poor. So while I don't want to take credit away from the Black Caps, I think it's important to remember they're obviously playing at home and the opposition haven't quite been as strong. But certainly when Aussie and England arrive here for this 2020 Tri-Series we have coming up, and then, of course, England are staying for some one-dayers and 2 Test matches. So I think we'll get a really decent gauge then of just how good this Black Cap side is, but no doubt it's a very good one.
Thanks, Clay, really appreciate it. Clay live from Eden Park, where the 2020 game begins at 7 o'clock. Yes, it'll be very exciting to have that England cricket team in the country, I think they're probably fairly evenly matched, aren't they? England playing well in the one days against Australia. That is Checkpoint for tonight. But just before we go, we were looking at the contamination of water around the Air Force bases in Ohakia, which is in the Manawatu near Bulls, of course, and Woodburn, which is in Blenheim. We were waiting for a response from the Defence Force. Here it is. Dear Bridget, who is our producer, please attribute the following to a spokesperson for the New Zealand Defence Force. We've just done that. Why haven't you contacted all the residents who live around the base? Bridget asks them. Not all residents are in the testing areas. We have contacted those residents where we took samples from water sources on their properties. How many people have you consulted? Bridget asks. Samples were taken from 64 properties, and we've been talking to people from those properties. Have the test results been communicated to the farmers' property owners? Yes, the Defence Force tell us. We've been calling landowners today. Should people be concerned if the young children are playing in the area that gets flooded by runoff, by the base historically or otherwise? The Ministry of Health has been providing advice on health questions, so you would be best to direct this question to them. What do you know about the public health effects of the chemicals? Please ask the Ministry of Health. Will you hold a public meeting? At this stage, we think the best way to communicate with the landowners is by calling them directly and visiting them so we can talk to them in person. That, a Q&A on paper from the New Zealand's Defence Force. We don't want there to be a precedent, by the way. We exist to interview people, and if we wanted to conduct interviews in writing, we would hire a pigeon and go back in time and work for a newspaper, although even newspapers aren't doing that stuff any longer because it's 21st century. That is the end. What camera am I looking at, Kelvin? I'm looking at camera, that one. That's Checkpoint for this evening. Thank you for joining us on your radio, your television, via courier pigeon, if you're in the Defence Force, or however you choose to connect with us today. We really appreciate your company. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Employers say the government's changes to employment laws will remove their flexibility and international competitiveness. Ohakia farmers are frustrated by the lack of information from the Defence Force about possible contamination of their water supply. Critics of a council decision to temporarily chlorinate Christchurch's water supply say the public should have been consulted. Hospitality New Zealand hopes other councils will follow the Queenstown Lakes move to restrict short-term rentals. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Hello. Hey, dog owners. Does your dog get jealous?
She is a jealous type.
I'm Alison Balance, and I'm off to the Clever Canine Lab to find out more about dog emotions. Did you enjoy that?
I don't think we will,